We have shards that were recovered down on the beach, some of them that my brother found that have that old symbol, that MHS on it.
I just walked along and my toe scrubbed against something white, and I looked down and I picked up this piece of pottery. And as I picked it up, there was another one next to it, so I picked it up and looked at them, and they had the USMHS on it, and I thought, wow, this is part of the hospital. So I brought it in and then washed it and glued it together, gave it to them for their museum. Collection of this stuff just has been with me of always, probably keeping the beach clean of stuff, and then it expanded to picking up these pieces that were more interesting. Sometimes there would be just plain bottles of different things, and the pan was in the old shop, and I never thought a whole lot about it except until later I saw that it had the USMHS on it. I was going to use it to wash old car parts in, but it had a hole in the bottom, but I saved it anyway. This bottle was found in the end of the shop building, and that is where I found also the original blueprint for this hospital building. But this had the oldest logo on it, and I gave it to Mom, and she had it on her mantle for years. I just found it out in the yard somewhere buried. They would use these a lot in the cannery for sealing out the cans. That was fun to find too.
That verifies that this station was in action before 1902. It started in 1899. Anytime anybody sees an USMHS, please send it to me, because that is significant of that era before 1902. That signifies that. I'd like you to look out on the river right in front of us. But if you look at that piling field, you will see at the each end of that piling field, you will see some larger piling. Those are called dolphins, and they're used to anchor ocean-going vessels. They look kind of like skinny teepees, and there's two of them. One set at the east end and one at the west end. And those were creosoted, so they have not rotted. The rest of the building has, of course, since that time been salvaged or gone in the drink. But that was a huge building. It was 250 feet by 60, so it was a long, narrow building. Then it was divided into two parts. The east end of the building was outfitted for showers for people coming in, both crew and immigrants. The first thing you had to do was go through health inspection, and those bathrooms were separate for men and women, and they were on that east end of the building. While your ship would moor at the east end, those two dolphins on the east end, you would enter that building, and while you were going through the health and cleaning up process, all of your belongings were put into the west side of the building, and they went through delousing retorts. That was to make sure that there were no germs that were embedded in your clothing and your luggage. So while you were doing that, then your ship was fumigated. And to fumigate those ships early on, they burned big vats of sulfur, and that they sealed off the ship, and the sulfur dioxide fumes that came off hopefully killed lots of those rats. We had a lot of rat problems, certainly infested ships at that time. They were a big problem, and the fleas on the rats did carry the bubonic plague, plus they weren't very clean, and that was a detriment to healthy conditions. After you passed health inspection and your clothes were cleaned up, by the way, that only took about an hour to fumigate your clothes, delouse your clothing, you had to have a place to stay. And initially they had tents set up on the grounds where crew and passengers, and they still were using that old Lamley house for some of that also, for housing people. But for a while they brought in a gunboat from retired from the Spanish-American War, and it was put, the USS Concord was put right out there by those dolphins on the west end, and we have pictures that were taken that were left here at the station. They were pretty proud to have that great big boat out there to look at, and that was your accommodation for that 48 hours while you were waiting for your ship to be cleaned up so that you could proceed upriver. The Oregonian article in 1921 did a full report on this, and they showed a picture of the Concord, and that it was a double spread. And this is the article that this text is embedded that says, "The Ellis Island for this district is located on the Washington side of the river near Knappton." Now that would be the little town a quarter of a mile upriver. And it ends with, "Thanks to the vigilance of the quarantine on the Columbia River, our cities have yet to experience the plague." So we were doing good. In fact, the United States really is credited due to the Commissioned Corps and the U.S. Health Service that to prevent disease from entering the country. Pretty successful. It really worked pretty well. Of course, we kept a few folks out that we didn't really want then also, but the primary role was to keep infectious disease from spreading throughout the country. Our most important artifact here really is this building, the lazaretto, the Pesthouse. The quarantine hospital has several monikers. Lazaretto stems from the early mariners. Lazarettos were built to curb infectious disease. It was to quarantine people, and that comes from the biblical referral to Lazarus, the old sick and disabled guy, and that was to take care of people who were infected. So they are also called a pest house. That's a translation really from that, and that's what this is. This quarantine hospital itself, since it was the most significant building left on the premises in pretty good shape, this was when we decided to see if we could keep this building, because it really tells the history of that particular era in time. The building itself is laid out like a duplex. It has duplicate features on each side of the building. The little building was built only to house 20 patients. There are 2 large wards, so you enter the building, and to the right and to the left, you will see a large ward, and on each end of the building, and those were walled off, on each end of the building there are 2 isolation wards. It's interesting that they do share a bathroom, but this was pretty functional at the time. There were 4 working bathrooms, and there still are. Well, most of them work in this building. They were shut off by doors. Evidently that protected the germs from flowing back and forth, but each of those isolation wards also has an exterior entry, so that a person who was isolated could be serviced from that outside area for food and medical attention, and would be quarantined in that little room. We actually have the blueprint for this hospital building that my brother found, and it has been very helpful. Students from Clatsop Community College Historic Preservation School have been able to utilize that blueprint to help us with the preservation of this building and try to keep it as authentic as possible. We've also been fortunate to get nice grants. We formed a 501c3, which allowed us to apply for grant money and to accept donations, and that has helped us to restore this building. The Kinsman Foundation out of Milwaukee, Oregon has been very generous with us and have funded funds for a new roof, foundation repair, and heating for this building. A lot of things that people don't notice when you go into a historic site, but there are a lot of unseen things that are primary to take care of if you want to save the old building. One of the main reasons we really want to preserve this building is that from research from our board, one of our board members has determined that this is actually the last quarantine hospital, the lazaretto of this period, built by the government for these stations, that remains open to the public. Many of the pest houses were burned because they were afraid that that infectious disease might still linger. Or they are in such disrepair that they are not safe enough to allow the public to visit. So we think it is really crucial that we attempt to really preserve this building as an example of that era and the quarantine that was necessary to control disease.